Okay, so now you've learned about milk steaming, and the next step is latte art. Woo! But I want to remind you again right now, you want to be really, really comfortable with steaming milk. The biggest improvement you can make on your latte art game is being able to steam milk as consistently as you can. If you're frustrated because every once in a while you get a nice little heart and then every other time it's a weird blob, it could be that you need to practice the physical motions more, but more likely it's inconsistent milk. Really nice milk wants to be swirly. It pours really well. It flows really nice. It's not going to pour itself. You can't just throw a pitcher of perfect milk at a drink and get a swan or anything. But the first step should come pretty readily if the milk is just right. I have fairly poor hand-eye coordination. I'm not an athlete, and sometimes I have really shaky hands, and my art comes out a little more lopsided, or I also get more shaky under pressure, and that's not what I'm talking about. Perfect color, perfect centering, yes, that's all practice art more. But if you're really struggling to regularly get even just a dot of foam to appear when you drop the pitcher to start your art, that's likely a sign that the milk isn't the right texture. So if you're just watching these in order, one day, then the next, that's fine. You can go ahead and keep watching this video, but I highly recommend coming back again after you've practiced steamed milk. Steam, 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 steam. Steam in the dish soap mixture, steam on milk whenever you're having a cappuccino or a latte. So now before we move on to how, let me quickly talk about the why. Why can you do this? And the short answer is stratification. Both the milk and the shot are made up of layers of different densities. In an espresso shot, you can see it pretty clearly. You have a denser liquid under this layer of bubbly oils, that's the crema. And in steamed milk, you have denser milk at the bottom under the layer of bubbly milk, that's the foam or the microfoam. Making latte art works with all those strata, all those density layers. The white that you see on a latte is some of that top layer of foamy milk sitting on top of that crema, on top of the mix of milk and espresso, which is that nice brown color. When you get lighter tan or beige colors, that's when the milk is starting to mix with the crema and lighten it. Dense milk wants to sink into the denser espresso, and the less dense foam wants to sit on top. When you carefully pour, when you carefully apply the foamy milk, it'll sit on top of the milk and espresso and also on top of the crema without mixing into either of them too much. You can do latte art types of things with anything that has this stratification. When you make matcha, you get a foamy top surface. You can pour a latte and make some art. You cannot do this with something like a cafe au lait or a tea latte because your hot tea or your normal brewed coffee are basically just one density throughout. So there are a couple of pieces to latte art. The first, as I've said, is properly steamed milk. You won't be able to get good consistent latte art if you're not consistent in your milk steaming. The second is being able to pour steadily and consistency. Here's another approach where you can just practice with water or your steamed soapy water. You just take a pitcher full of water and you practice pouring at a constant rate, and then you pour your water back in and do it again. It is, in fact, a little harder than it sounds, especially when you try to slow down and pour at a slow constant rate. Kind of like a bike. It's hard to ride a bike without wobbling at a really slow speed. I don't know why, but it is. The third is your approach. So let's get into that. When you start pouring, even if you pour completely without thinking about it, what happens is that your denser, less foamy milk at the bottom is pouring out first. You'll always get to the end and have foamier milk. This is super noticeable if you've let your milk sit. If it gets really foamy, now all you have is milk when you first pour, and all the foam stays and floats back and it just kind of plops on at the end. We're not going for that, but the principle is the same with well-steamed, well-incorporated milk. You still have the less foamy milk pouring and then the more foamy milk. So if you combine that with pouring techniques to shape exactly when the milk dives under the top versus when the foam starts sitting on top, you can get latte art. When you start filling your latte, you want to pour from higher up, and you always want a fairly thin stream of milk. I hear a pencil width a lot. I don't know exactly what that is, maybe half a centimeter, quarter of inch. But what this does is it helps the milk to dive under the crema, hopefully without breaking up the crema too much. The difference in densities also causes the milk to dive, so we're trying to have these two things work together and not fight each other to get exactly what we want. If you pour too fast, you can break up the crema, add bubbles, or overfill, and now you won't have time to make art on top. You also want to take this time to sort of mix evenly as you pour. So as you pour, after you've gotten the hang of pouring evenly, start to do that nice even pour, but in a little circle around the cup to mix it. It's also important not to pour right onto a wall or onto a thinner part of the cup, because then you can have the milk sort of slingshot around the curve and it causes lighter spots to appear or can break up the crema. A decent rule of thumb is to sort of fill the cup about halfway. It'll vary a little from design to design, but halfway is a good starting point. The second step is the layering. I actually think about this more as like a laying out, almost like a spreading frosting sort of thing rather than pouring, because I'm really trying to lay this down gently. I don't want any diving. So you want to pour as close to the surface as you can get. You almost want the spout of your pitcher to touch the level of the milk as you pour. You'll notice as I've demoed a little bit, I keep tipping my cup, and that's because as you pour, that allows you to, when you go down to layer, get your pitcher very close, like I was saying. You want that tip right up against the liquid level, and when the cup is angled, you can get a lot closer than if I'm pouring from up here. Where exactly you start your art pour differs a little depending on what you're making. If you have multiple tiers to the art, like a rosetta or a tulip, which is some stacked hearts, in all of them, you want to get super close to that surface. Now, if you've steamed too much milk, you'll notice that here. You'll have so much that you can't tip your pitcher very far over, and then it's hard to get close to the surface. If your cup's almost all the way full, you can't tip it very much. For good art, you'll always have to steam a little more milk than what you needed to fill the cup, but you don't want to have too much, because obviously that's wasteful, and also you'll have a harder time with your art. When I very first started as a barista, I was kind of proud of how well I could perfectly steam the right amount of milk. I could consistently just dump the whole pitcher into a cup, and it was like the perfect fill amount. And then when I started trying to do latte art, it was really hard because I'd always mess up right at the end because I didn't have enough milk to finish off the art. I would try to cross my heart and it would just be too foamy, or maybe I wouldn't even have any left and now it's just ruined. So you always need a little more milk than will perfectly fill your latte mug, but not a lot. So let's get on to the application. So a monk's head is your very, very starting point. For this one, I want to be pouring as close to the center of the cup when I tilt my mug, and I want to try to get close to the surface, but also close to centered front and back here. What this is you start your pour low, you start your laying, and you want to let it spread into a circle around your spout. As you pour, you can maybe think of it like ripples in a pond. The whole thing will spread radially outward. So if I start and just kind of sit there, I'll have a circle that sort of expands around my spout. And the second step that you take is actually lifting up your pitcher back as you pour. So it starts more of that diving action, and it pushes this little wedge into your foam circle. So you can see it's kind of like the top part of a heart or a little peach shape. But this is a really good indicator of your milk. Do you get the white circle part starting to appear when you lower your pitcher? Or do you just have a mound forming? Or do you just have a tannish smear that appears if all your milk keeps going under the surface and mixing in? If you're getting a really good color appearing, you're doing great. Practice that slow pour, let the circle expand, and then pull up into the middle to get a sense of how this feels. You can start higher up in the cup, closer to the center, see how that shape expands and where it lands. It will always expand radially and just a little bit down. So the shape should be fairly centered if you don't push it around too much or pull back too much as you pour. So this is really close to a heart. Can you make it into a heart? Yes, yes you can. To go from this to a heart, you start very similarly, but actually when you lift and start diving, you drag that all the way through your circle. So you push your little wedge in, and now you have a little bottom added tail, and voila, a heart. So if you've watched the milk steaming video and you've practiced a bunch and you can do hearts on hearts on hearts, what do you do next? Try putting the hearts on hearts, stack them. This is also known as a tulip. So make your first heart little dot, but before you draw through, go back and add another little heart dot right above it. It'll push the lower dot out a little bit in the same way that pouring spreads out radially. So you add your second heart and then draw through both of them together. You can kind of do this ad infinitum and create taller and taller and taller tulips. It's a really great way to start practicing placement. Note that with each additional stacked heart, you'll want to start a little lower down in your cup, which does mean you're pouring from a little higher on those early ones. So with 2 hearts, you'll aim for about the center first and then just above the center for the second one. And if you want to add a whole bunch of hearts, you'll have to be pushing the hearts very much into one another. Okay, so the last thing I will address in this video is adding a swirl or a wiggly action. You can practice this on a heart and you'll get sort of like a lacy looking heart. When you start pouring, you'll just add a little bit of back and forth action with your arm. These also spread out radially so that a small wiggle is very enhanced as you go on. All of these steps are really the basis, as far as I know, for almost every type of free pour art. Combining those dots, the draw through, the wiggle can get you all kinds of beautiful work. So now you might be thinking again, but Kathryn, I make 1 latte a day. How do I get better? I can't practice this with soapy water, can I? And the answer is you can actually, but of course you're still wasting espresso shots. There is, however, a way to practice multiple times with just 1 pitcher of milk, and you don't even need to pull espresso shots to do this. I learned this method from a video, I think maybe I saw it on Reddit some time ago, and I really wish I remembered where it came from. So if you think you know the video, please speak up. I would love to credit whoever I saw this video from. But the secret is actually finely ground coffee. For example, the amount of coffee in 1 typical dose of espresso. If you're really committed to getting latte art down, can you afford to throw out the equivalent of 1 latte each time you want to sit down and practice a few lattes, 1 shot's worth, 1 pitcher of milk? Well, that answer's up to you, but it's worth considering. So how do you do this? Take your grounds, your mug, your pitcher of milk. You steam up your milk. Now you throw a little bit of coffee grounds, just a little pinch, and you drop them into the mug. Pour a little bit of milk into the cup, give it a good swirl to mix the grounds in. Give your pitcher a swirl, and now pour as if this were espresso. Your contrast will obviously be a lot lower, but you can certainly still see what you've done. So there's 1. How do I do more? You just pour it back into the pitcher. Swirl it really good. You want to reincorporate all that foam into the milk. Pinch another little bit of grounds into your mug. Add a little bit of milk, and go again. This latte will be a little darker, and each one after will get a little darker because you're mixing the grounds right into the milk. But you can do this several times. And I think practicing back to back is really helpful to get a muscle memory for what works and what doesn't, as opposed to just getting a good latte on one day and a bad one the next. It's a little harder for me to tell when they're far apart in time. The next video in our series is going to cover some alt milks, how they steam up differently from whole milk, and just the science of milk steaming in general. You can find a link to that next video in the bio, and if you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe. You can also find a lot of other classes at sagebrushcoffee.com. Thanks again for watching. I'm Kathryn, and I hope you have a great day.